The empath's silent exit is not kindness, it's execution. Jung understood why silence can be more terrifying than rage. No screams, no arguments, no slammed doors. Only absence, cold, absolute absence. The one who gave everything suddenly vanishes into a silence so sharp it cuts deeper than any blade. Why does it destroy those who fed on their kindness? Because silence forces them into a mirror they've avoided their entire lives. It whispers the truth they cannot escape. They never loved you. They consumed you. Imagine it. You've been the vessel, the healer, the invisible backbone of everyone's chaos. You absorbed their anger, their venom, their unspoken shadows, until your own soul felt borrowed, foreign, unrecognizable. But then something fractures, not in flames, not in fury, but in quiet certainty. You stop explaining. You stop apologizing. You stop answering their endless cries. This is not withdrawal. This is exorcism. Jung named it the withdrawal of projections. And to those who depended on your endless giving, it feels like psychological warfare. Because now the monsters they buried in you return home to them. Sensitive ones, what we now call empaths, were what Jung called innately sensitive souls, living mirrors, prison keepers for other people's unconscious terrors. You became the container of their sickness, carrying what they refused to face. Their rage lived in your chest. Their despair haunted your veins. Their shadows wore your face. Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. But for the sensitive soul, that fate was never theirs. It was borrowed, inherited, imposed. Here lies the helper-set's curse. The more you save others from their demons, the more they chain themselves to your light. You become less a person, more a function. Not loved, not seen, only used. An unconscious contract is written in invisible ink. You bleed, they feed. You carry, they rest. You disappear, they thrive. And you believe it sets love. But Jung whispered another truth. We cannot change anything until we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it imprisons. In these contracts, only the empath transforms. The sensitive bends, breaks, absorbs, while the others remain frozen, untouched, static. This is why individuation, the birth of the true self, requires what Jung called the courage to be displeasing. And for the empath, this feels like treason, because their entire identity is forged from sacrifice. To refuse is to kill the role they were forced to play. The stages of this awakening are brutal. Stage 1, psychological clarity. It is not thunder, it is not fire, it is a flicker, a small crack in the glass that reveals the entire prison. You see it. You were never a lover, never a friend, never a partner. You were an emotional machine. Jung said, the world will ask you who you are. If you do not know, it will tell you. And the world told you, you are nothing but service. That was the moment your silence began sharpening its blade. Clarity births the shadow, the unbearable truth that you participated in your own undoing. Not guilt, awareness, not shame sight. And once you see you cannot unsee, then comes the great reorientation. Your river turns inward, no longer feeding their thirsty mouths. You conserve, you question, you breathe your own breath for the first time. You whisper to yourself questions forbidden for years. What do I want? What do I need? Who am I when I am not everyone else sets? Ghost. And the silence answers, not gently, not kindly, but with a violence that liberates. Jung's words echo here, like a curse and a promise. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. That is the true terror of the empath steps exit. It is not revenge. It is resurrection. And to those who lived on your sacrifice, your silence is the sound of their world collapsing. But here sits what Jung knew about this process. Every boundary is not just a wall, it is a mirror. It reflects back to others the very void they've been running from. When you withdraw, you do not punish them, you expose them. The empath step's absence creates a vacuum, a hollow silence where once there was constant soothing. You no longer initiate conversations. You no longer rush to patch the fractures. You no longer bleed on command. Most devastating of all, you stop explaining. You stop begging to be understood. You stop asking for permission to exist. Jung called this the withdrawal of participation mystique, the breaking of the spell that kept your soul entangled in other people's storms. You are no longer their echo. You become their witness. And witnessing is far more terrifying than fixing. The impact on them is immediate. The mask slips. They see, often for the first time, how much they depended on your invisible labor. Their calm was never theirs. It was yours. Their peace was never earned. It was borrowed. And now the silence screams louder than any confrontation ever could. If you've gone silent with someone who drained you, you already know silence is the most violent sound. Jung warned this is not cruelty, it is self-preservation. But to those addicted to your availability, your disappearance feels like death. Not because they love you, but because without you, they must face themselves. And most people cannot. Some respond with fury. They call you selfish, cold, unrecognizable. But Jung would tell you, this rage is shadow. They accuse you of what they are. They project the selfishness they've buried inside. Others become desperate. They flood you with false affection, promises to change, sudden confessions that smell of decay. This is what I call the Hoover, a manipulation designed not to love you, but to pull you back into orbit. Jung cautioned, where love reigns, there is no will to power. Where the will to power is paramount, love is absent. Their attention is not affection. It is hunger. It is possession. The rarest response, the one almost no one chooses, is accountability. To look in the mirror of your absence and whisper, I was the one who drained. I was the one who used. I must change. But Jung knew such courage is rare, because it requires swallowing shadows whole. Knowing your own darkness, he wrote, is the best method for dealing with the darkness of others. And then comes the final transformation, the birth of psychological sovereignty. You are no longer a container. You are no longer an echo. You are no longer the graveyard where other people bury their unprocessed pain. You become something terrifying and untouchable, a person who belongs to themselves. Jung called this conscious empathy, the ability to feel without drowning, to care without being consumed, to love without becoming a sacrifice. Here is the paradox. When you finally choose yourself, the world calls you cold, but in truth, you are warm for the first time, because the fire is finally burning in your own chest, not theirs. Jung warned, however, of the shadow of sovereignty, the loneliness that stalks those who refuse to be used. When you stop attracting those who need fixing, you stand in a strange silence, until you find those who value authenticity over utility. That is the brutality of the quiet exit. It is not revenge. It is not punishment. It is rebirth. And rebirth is always violent. Jung understood that the empath's quiet exit is not just absence. It is a mirror that forces others to see themselves, raw and unfiltered, often for the very first time. Without your buffering, without your soft hands absorbing their storms, they are left naked in the violence of their own psyche. Some will invent stories to escape the truth. They changed. They became selfish because accepting their role in the collapse would shatter their fragile mask. Others will crack under the silence. Jung called it a neurotic breakdown, a collapse of the old scaffolding, forcing them to build new, sturdier structures. For a rare few, the silence becomes a portal. They awaken. They finally see that their parasitic feeding kept them from growing roots of their own. Jung discovered the most brutal truth of all. The quiet exit does not only steal comfort, it confronts others with the unlived life. Your presence was not just soothing, it was anesthesia. It dulled the pain, numbed the conflict, delayed the growth. When you vanish, the drug wears off. Now they must feel everything. The ghosts they buried return, uninvited, and for many, it is unbearable. No tree, Jung wrote, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Your silence drags them downward. It forces their roots into the underworld they've been avoiding. That is why it feels like revenge. Not because you harmed them, but because you stopped shielding them from their own descent. And you, through fire and silence, become something Jung foresaw. The sovereign sensitive, not a vessel, not a scapegoat, not a receptacle for borrowed demons, but a being who can feel without drowning, a love without losing, help without hollowing. This is what Jung called the conscious individual, one who responds rather than reacts, one who chooses rather than absorbs, one who refuses to die for someone else's unlived life. The world calls this cruelty, but Jung called it consciousness, and consciousness is humanity's most terrifying power. Your sensitivity was never weakness. It was the weapon hidden inside your chest. When shielded by boundaries, it becomes not a curse, but a force, a superpower forged in shadows. Every time you choose authenticity over approval, you fracture the collective trance. Every time you set a boundary, you burn through the unconscious contract. Every time you withdraw, you force others to meet themselves in the mirror of your absence. Jung warned, the individual has always had to struggle, not to be overwhelmed by the tribe. And that is what your silence is, the rebellion against the unconscious swarm. Understand this, your quiet exit is not revenge, it is revelation. It is the moment when the mask slips, when exploitation is unmasked as exploitation, when love and power are shown to be enemies. Your silence is not cruelty, it is clarity. Your withdrawal is not punishment, it is protection. Your boundaries are not walls, they are foundations. And the brutal irony, those who truly deserve you will not fear your silence. They will honor it. They will respect it. They will meet it with their own authenticity. The rest will fall away, screaming into the mirror you left behind. That is why the empath's exit feels like the sharpest revenge, because it was never revenge at all. It was the truth, finally revealed.